Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Rocket Summer, another hit Michael K. Vaughan event in which we read classic science fiction in the hot days of July. I confess that when I was looking forward to Rocket Summer, I was not anticipating that the hot days of July would be quite this hot, but it's mighty, mighty hot. You will doubtless hear the hum of a little air conditioner unit in the background. Uh, Rocket Summer is only a month long, and we have a lot of science fiction to cover. Because the starting point is the beginning of science fiction, whenever you want to say that that is. Uh, Mary Shelley, usually, Frankenstein, and God help us, The Last Man are usually a typical starting point, but you've got H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, you've got people like that, and then you move forward into the pulp era with Edgar Rice Burroughs, Hugo Gernsback, all these different people, and then uh, uh, further on than that, as science grows, in the post-war years, science filters down into the public world. And as science grows, science fiction grows. You've got a huge market in magazines and pulps and whatnot, and book contracts, more and more book contracts. And then into the 60s, the real golden era of science fiction when it explodes in terms of quality and quantity. And our cutoff point is the 1960s. Our cutoff point is the year 1970, after which science fiction started to fundamentally change. Worthy of an event all by itself, I would think. Maybe Stephen E. Andrews can do that. But the natural progression of this event would be that you start at the earliest decades of science fiction and move your way forward. And I have not been doing that. I'm a bad co-host. Must be why. That and the smell must be why I'm not asked to co-host all that many events. I instead have been bouncing all around in the wide gambit of what we're doing, reading science fiction novels that are fairly well known. Certainly in the world of science fiction, fairly well known, and some outside the world of science fiction. I wonder what actually caused this. It could be a little bit of cross-pollination because I am doing a chapter-by-chapter read-through of Frank Herbert's Dune, which is from this time period. It's one of these pre-1970s science fiction novels. Maybe that's got me doing this. Certainly, there's an aspect of reading Dune chapter by chapter that is not present in a lot of the rereads that I'm doing for Rocket Summer, which is that Dune I know well. I reread it all the time. And a lot of the books that I'm rereading for Rocket Summer, I haven't read in years or decades. That is true with the one I read last night. I was enraptured. It actually shouldered aside a lot of the reading that I was doing, that I was supposed to do last night. And that is The Left Hand of Darkness, which is widely considered to be Ursula Le Guin's masterpiece, this and The Dispossessed. It's not my favorite book of hers, and there were points during last night's reread when I was thinking that was going to change. My favorite book of hers is The Lathe of Heaven. But there were points when I was rereading this book and discovering so much of what's in here, where I was thinking, wait, are you actually enjoying this more? Is this your favorite Ursula Le Guin novel, as boring as that would be? Not the book, but the choice. This is everybody's favorite Ursula Le Guin novel, but it didn't quite do it. But still, I was reading this last night, and I was wondering periodically as I was rereading it. I was thinking, how long has it been since you read this book? I think it was the early 90s. That's a long time. None of us want to admit that, but that's a long time from our current unguessable year. Too long for an author this good, for a book this good. This is 1969, I think. This is Ursula Le Guin's 1969 novel, The Left Hand of Darkness, which is set in a far future world in which there is a conglomeration of planets. There's an interplanetary conglomeration. It's called the Ecumen. It's not the Federation or the Council or the whatever. It's the collective. It's the Ecumen, and they routinely send out envoys to other worlds in order to see if they want to join. See if they want to join, add their distinctiveness to the whole. They send an envoy named Genly I, AI, not that AI, but his name is AI, spelled AI. They send him to the planet Gethin. It's known to its inhabitants as the world of Gethin. To the people of the Ecumen, it's known as the world Winter, very simply, because it's a very cold world. As is foreshadowed on this cover, which is the cover of the mass market paperback where I originally read this book. Genly AI goes to Gethin, goes to Winter, in order to make overtures to as many of the peoples there as he can. And his overtures are stymied or delayed by two main factors. One is that, very refreshingly, Gethin isn't many people. It's many nations. It's not just one homogeneous planet. It's not like if you talk to one citizen of the planet Winter, you're talking to all of them. They all have different societies. They all have different histories. They all have different mytho-histories. And they all have to be navigated, each individually, by our character, by our focused character. But there's another big stumbling block to his putting overtures to the people of Gethin, and that is that the people of Gethin are weird. They are genderless most of the time. They only develop genders, male and female, during their mating seasons. Otherwise, no. And only isolated to that specific time. In other words, the gender dichotomy, gender relations, intergender violence has not been a part of the forming of the societies of this world. All the societies, no matter how different they are, they have that one thing in common. Ursula Le Guin has said many times, she said many times in her life, said many times in lectures, I believe she writes something like this in a later introduction that she wrote to this book. It wasn't present in my paperback, but she has said many times, a very good observation. All of her observations are very good. This is a titanic figure in the genre. She's made the observation many, many times that science fiction is not about predicting the future. It's about excavating the present. Pick an element of the present and write and examine it somehow. Now, the element of the present that, to reduce this to very simplistic terms, the element of the present that she's examining here is feminism, is the war between the sexes, as was the old phrase in my day, is how that has shaped your society, for good or ill, mostly for ill. And the way you examine that is to create a society in which that does not exist, a society in which that element is missing. Well, then build your society around that absence. What would that be? What would that be like? I really like that observation, but then I was very fond of this author. I had the great pleasure of meeting and talking to her a couple of times, and it was a lot of fun. The first time about science fiction in the back room of a used bookstore here in Boston, and the second time delightfully about anything but science fiction. That was the sort of groaned imprecation at the beginning of the conversation. Can we talk about anything but? That was fascinating to talk all about the politics up in Washington. That element of this book, that the Gethinites, the people of Winter, have no genders, therefore don't have any history of gender. That is the standout feature of this book, and is usually the thumbnail feature if you're going to talk about it at all. It certainly was the thumbnail standout feature of this book in my own memory of this book from reading it all those years ago. Rereading it, I was blown away by how much more there is to this book than that. There's a huge amount more here. This is a gigantic amount of world building. Not only lateral world building, so to speak, across the different countries, the different religions, the different power structures. Genli Ai has a lot of misadventures on this world, some of them pretty horrifying. But also world building in terms of depth as well. Going back into the past, we get lots and lots of the history and mytho-history of all of the cultures of this world. This is a very archaeological book. If you know anything about Ursula Le Guin and her parents, you know that that's no mistake, that's no coincidence. It's really well done. I had lost track. I had thought, when I thought back on this book, I had thought that horrible word relevant. This book is in some ways more relevant in 2024 than it has ever been, because thanks to social media and social contagion and a whole lot of social extortion, arm twisting, threats, the prevalent view in academia, where this book is studied on syllabuses, and also on social media, where a lot of people spend a lot of their time, is that roughly 70% of the adult population of the world was misassigned their gender at birth by an evil white doctor. Am I right? Up top. That's, of course, nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. And yet, I guarantee you, if you have a kid who's in grade school, virtually everyone in their class who's got hold of this idea, if you live in a sane state, then no, the idea has not been allowed to take hold. But if you don't live in a sane state, then everyone in class, all the boys think they're girls, all the girls think they're boys, or half of each of those groups think they're something else, that they're Gethamites or something, that don't have a gender, or something like that. A lot of Judith Butler speak about gender, the relationship between genders that she calls social constructs, and sex, which is biologically determinate, except when it's not. All of that stuff, a perfect yardstick of the way that Ursula Le Guin could do powerful thinking when she sat down to dream up a book. All of that stuff now, 50 years after this book was printed, has become a gigantically ubiquitous element in the mental groundwater of society. It didn't exist at the time. At the time, this was a thought experiment. Now it's around every corner. You absolutely can't avoid it. And if you deal with any of the institutions that have been completely culturally captured by this ideology, this religion, and those institutions are hard to avoid because they're academia, the workplace, and Hollywood. If you deal with any of that, you're going to be encountering a side of this book that was beyond Ursula Le Guin's wildest imaginations. In some states in the United States today, if you go into an emergency room and say, I'd like to be treated, I've got a persistent burning sensation in my upper chest, the doctor who comes into, eventually, you'll wait 10 hours, but eventually a doctor will come into the room. And in some states in the United States in 2024, the doctor will look at you and ask whether you're a man or a woman. And you just, no matter how much sunk cost you have of waiting all this time, you have to just get up and walk out. A so-called trained medical profession who cannot tell whether you're a male or a woman is obviously not going to give you good health, good care. But that is common now. There are reports of that all over. People get that question, are you a man or a woman? And also, famously, infamously, a candidate for the United States Supreme Court, before it became the Trump Court, could be asked by a member of the Judicial Committee, can you tell me what a woman is, and say, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professional, and still get passed for the court. So all of these ideas that are the main thing you remember about this book have been dumped into the cultural common horse trough, and we are all dealing with them now. When this first came out, we were not. When this first came out, it was designed to point a rather sharp scalpel focus at women, at feminism. Well, okay, what would happen if there were a world where there weren't any gender distinctions? Won't that throw a light on all of the bad ways that there are gender distinctions today? And how trivial they are. How meaningless they are when you show me them in the context of a world where they don't exist. And it helps that Genly AI meets and gets to know really well an inhabitant of Winter, Estraven, a character named Estraven. It's a training process for the reader. All the people on Getham are called he. They're all referred to as he, him, whatnot. But they're not. They're referred to that way for narrative convenience of the novel, but they're not. Some of them aren't. They aren't either. They aren't anything. And they don't know what they're going to be during mating season. They don't know what characteristics they're going to develop. But it's not the way it is in normal human society. Genly AI knows this right away and is not happy with it. It's deeply unsettling. And when you read the book, it's deeply unsettling for you as a reader in a very good way, in a very healthy way. You are being asked, demanded by this narrative, to figure out what gender is. What is it to you? How important is it to you? Can you like Estraven, the character, if you don't know what Estraven is? In bed? In the bedroom? On, prom night or whatnot? Well, how important is that to you, and how important should it be? All of those kinds of gender-related questions are asked in this book, and they are every bit as effectively, intelligently done during this second reread, this reread from decades ago, as they were the first time. But the thing that really struck me this time around, I don't know this is the second time I've read this book. I think I've read it more often than that. I think I read it during the 90s. I know that, and I read it when it first came out. That's 2 times right there. It's a great book, one of the great science fiction novels, so you should make a habit of regularly rereading great books under the assumption that there's a lot packed in there. But the thing that really struck me this time around in this rereading, whatever rereading it was, is how much else there is here. How much else there is of an intergalactic civilization and galactic ideas and adventure, which ought not to have surprised me. In a lot of Ursula Le Guin's YA fiction, what we would now call YA fiction, she shows a good hand at writing adventure. It shouldn't have surprised me to find so much of that in here. I guess my main takeaway from rereading this for Rocket Summer is how much is going on in this book that I just blew through, that I blew over when I read it the first time and the second time. Very happy to have reread this. I feel like I understand, I appreciate a lot more of it now than I ever did in any previous exposure to this book. And if I'm being fair, Judith Butler is partly responsible for that. We live in an era where, yes, questions of gender and identity and gender fluidity and nonsense about asexuality and they, them pronouns and whatnot, we live in an era in which all of that has been hyper-tokenized by massive billion-dollar institutions. It's been hyper-tokenized in society. It's been blown, to use an easy phrase, it's been blown way, way out of proportion. Yes, we live in an era in which that is true, but the bedrock of that huge overreaction is still good. It's still making us think about traditional gender roles, how repressive they can be, how oppressive they can be to young boys and girls who maybe just want to be themselves. Maybe don't saddle them with your own Hollywood-fueled expectations until they decide what they want to do. All of that kind of thinking is incredibly helpful. And thanks to this movement and Judith Butler and whatnot, we're all a lot more tuned to it in the United States than we used to be. A lot more. In ways that, yes, it has been taken too far, but the bedrock of it is incredibly healthy. And it's had its effect on me, same as it has on anybody else. I live here. I don't ever leave this couch, but I do still live here. I'm online a lot. I was noticing that a little bit begrudging. I don't particularly like a lot of the aspects of the gender fluid two-spirit cult type thinking that's going on in 2024 and that has such a grip on so much of society in America. I don't particularly like a lot of that. Some of it I actively hate. That's a discussion for an entirely different video, entirely different YouTube channel. But that basic conscious awareness has definitely been raised, even in me, in all of us, I think. And that, I couldn't help but bring that to a reread of this book, much to my pleasure, much to my profit. Amazing, amazing stuff. And Ursula Le Guin throws in enough adventure and enough archaeology to keep this interesting, even apart from the ideology. I like I've said many times so far this month, the month is still young, we're not even in double digits yet. My Rocket Summer has not been the Rocket Summer that I planned. It hasn't been the 35-cent pot boilers, the bug-eyed monster pot boilers that I assembled for Rocket Summer. But boy, oh boy, I wouldn't change it so far. I am revisiting all of these major works of the genre that I love. And always to my benefit. So as always, almost always, I'm coming away thinking, well, I got something out of that reread. Might not have estimated the book even higher, although my estimation of Left Hand of Darkness went up. And it was already pretty high. I might not be getting that out of every book, but I'm having a ball doing this. I'm having a ball being a bad co-host. I'm being a bad co-host. I should be reading, right now I should be moving into, the 30s and the 40s by now? Instead I'm bouncing all over this time period. But I'm having a blast. I think Michael K. Vaughan would probably admit that that is the most important thing. So I'm just going to keep doing this. Those poor, ignored 35-cent moldy paperbacks, they'll always be there. I can always go back to them. So who knows what I'll add to the pile tonight. I was not expecting to reread The Left Hand of Darkness. I wasn't expecting to reread I Am Legend. So we'll see. Who knows? I've got a lot of suggestions from a lot of you. I'll probably take one of those for tonight. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. I would love right now, today, this week, this coming week in Boston, I would love to live on a planet called winter. I would love to have nice, cool weather. Winter, it's freezing cold, but as our character, Jen Lee AI, learns this in a brutal way, sent to a labor camp at one point in the book for a long stretch, has to deal with this with almost no protection. That would be nice. That'd be a dream come true when it's 85 degrees at 7 in the morning. But I don't, so I'll use science fiction as escapism, as I always have. So I'll wrap this up for now. We'll be back to Rocket Summer next time, and I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.